So our first principle, keep the end game in mind. And for this, it is easy to remember these two images, where we are and where we'd like to be. And keeping the end game in mind is about directing ourselves towards this more organized project. And initially this will seem abstract, why bother thinking on how to organize stuff when you haven't even yet built, you only have 3 wires, there is no organization issue, everything seems pretty clear. And if you're just starting, and we also have very little context to work with, it's not easy to derive any design from that. But the idea is the more experience you get, the more applications you'll be involved, you'll start to get this feeling of how things tend to grow from one into another, how they relate, how they connect to each other. And in the end, there is always a bigger picture forming behind the scenes. So the more the application grows, the more it resemble this or this better version, right? So keeping the end game in mind is about us trying to control the direction of growth. We should not stop to congratulate ourselves that we found a way to make something technically work, right? One of these little blue wires. It is more about that controlled direction that makes a difference in the long run. So what I want to make sure is you get out of this box of thinking, when you're just concerned with little individual parts, and figuring something technically is where we start from, not where we end. We can think of the actual implementation effort as an iceberg, something like 20-80%. What the users gets to have in his front end is 20%, and the rest of the 80% should go in here, right, in the hidden depths that support our direction. And once you go through a few applications, you'll see that user requests are usually simple, not that much varied. And handling them technically is the easy part, right? And then the work begins. We want to have this kind of deliberateness in our work. We do not want to let the code take us places just because it works, right? There are so many ways of making it work, but only a few will keep an overall coherence and vision behind the scenes. And we want to remember to look for those. And when we are working on a request, first, all we want is to understand the context. And what I mean by this are 2 parts: the business context and the current application. And the business context is understanding the reasons behind the request. What are the problems we are trying to solve and why we are trying to solve them. Because business most often will come to you and ask you to implement directly a solution. They will not tell you why they want that one solution. And this means you have to look for yourself. So let's take an example. Business wants an email escalation for the manager, right, on some approval task. And they will justify it by saying they don't want to block the whole workflow because the manager forgets. Then we want to ask ourselves, what is the context of this problem? And we can imagine users have a lot of portals in doing their job. So they don't have time to check every day to see, oh, I have another BPM task. And one of the solutions would be for them to be notified in a centralized way, right? So they get all notifications via email and they know where to go and put their input. And this already gives us a little bit more information, right, than just going head first into implementing an email service. We ask ourselves, what is the user used to? What are his expectations? Does he already receive other notifications from other systems? Maybe they receives from our own system. So we would like to see those and align ourselves, right, in order to create a more unified and better experience. And what this will do is build more trust and a better relationship with the business, right? Because you take more time to understand their problem, you put more deep effort into it. And this also creates a growth path, trying to understand the business context. Because maybe in the future, we can come up with some weekly centralized report, right, with all their overdue activities. You see, so putting effort into understanding the business context opens the door to different questions than those technically minded ones. And better understanding of the actual user needs gives you that vision and direction to grow, right, and forms a deliberateness behind the scenes. So first part of the hidden iceberg is this business context. Remember to put yourself in the business user's shoes. Okay. Second part, once we have that done, we want to look in the current implementation, right? We want to see what we already have in place regarding the business needs. What services, what data structures, can we align with that? What's already there. If we already have a way to handle emails, does it fit? Does it lend itself to this request? Can we adapt it? Does it offer a smooth path to the growth we see in the future, right? And obviously this is a bit idealistic, the whole driving context, because real life is usually more messy, and especially if there are a few levels, right, between yourself and the business user, you'll have a harder time actually understanding what they really want. But it pays for us to have some deliberateness, right, to put some effort into shaping a direction. Even if it will prove to not be the perfect one, it still helps us align and produce better results in the future, right? And once we have this context, then we can move to the second part of the hidden iceberg, the maintenance, right? This maintenance is more palpable, it's less abstract, and is also very important to consider at each future implementation we are doing. So first of all, it has to be clear and as simple as possible, right, for you to understand. And this means you want things to be structured in such a way that you can see how the data travels from one service to another, and you can see how it gets manipulated and what kind of algorithms you are using on it, and to make it easy for you to understand it fast, right? In case you need to change something or see where error comes from, you need to be able to understand what's there very fast. And this will go more into the second principle. We'll be talking about improving the fundamentals. But until we get there, it's important to remember that part of the maintenance is to keep things as simple as possible, right? Then we want to consider error management, right? Because it can fail here, it can fail there, it might receive bad data, or it might receive empty data, and that can break your implementation, right? And if it fails, you have to know what your options are. Should you raise that error? Should you block it, stop the instance, or stop the error and let the instance go on? And you always have to consider some things might fail, right? And always have a recovery plan. At a minimum, we need to know immediately when something bad happens, right? And we also want to know the context of that exception. What was my data when it failed, and where exactly did it fail, right? And we'll do a whole chapter on error management because it's really, really important. Yet at this point, we have to remember it as part of the iceberg for our implementation. Happy case is always very easy and pie, right? But the idea is to keep our deliberateness at each step. First, we do the business analysis, and then we consider this maintenance, right? And because we are here to make the code work for us, not the other way around, okay? And the last part is change, right? Change for sure will always be coming. So the more we understand the business context, the more we can prepare for future changes. User will want better information, better experience, better consistency between all the dashboards, between all the applications, right? And so let's say you have an email here. You need to expand it to add better look and feel, right? A more informative body, maybe some attachments, and so on. So change means you have to keep your services flexible and your data structure flexible. Preparing for change has to be, again, deliberate. The ability to feel this one thing growing to another, and this will come in real life with experience. You'll have to go through many messes until patterns start to click. But for now, we want to keep in mind that this little feature we're working on right now, this will have to change at some point. And maybe it's a good idea to make it a little less dependent, more self-sustained, easier to pick apart. Maybe we should leave some notes for ourselves saying, okay, this is what I intended for it, and this is how I expect it to grow, because change is for sure coming. This is 100% guaranteed. Okay. So keeping the end game in mind is about the direction and vision for your application, and the fact that you should set one. And this idea of working towards a less messier end result translates into being a little bit more deliberate, right? For us to do so means not getting trapped into just making stuff work. We want to focus the whole iceberg every time, right? We want to grow our capacity to be deliberate and take little by little more control of our own code. Right, so keep in mind there is a context we want to understand. Keep in mind there is maintenance we want to be able to handle, and that change will come for sure. And Since this was a lot of theory, okay, on keeping the end game in mind, let's do some practice on it.